Welcome to this Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the ghost lineage mystery. We're basically taking on the role of forensic detectives to investigate a really ancient genetic secret that's actually hidden right inside our very own cells. You know, when we think about the history of human ancestry, it's super tempting to just assume we've already got the whole story neatly figured out. But well, science has this funny way of throwing a wrench into tidy narratives, and what we're uncovering today is absolutely going to change the way we understand our past.
We all know about our closest relatives, right? The Neanderthals, the Denisovans. They almost always take center stage when we talk about ancient human history. But today, we're asking a different, kind of more tantalizing question. Is our human family tree hiding other completely unknown suspects? Did our ancestors actually interbreed with lineages that literally have no modern descendants? Because as scientists started poking through massive collections of genomic data, they kept getting these weird hints that our ancestry is way, way more complex than we ever imagined.
Okay, so let's start with our baseline. Many populations globally carry an average of about 2% Neanderthal DNA. And for a really long time, having the genomes of Neanderthals and Denisovans on hand made total sense of the strange genetic quirks researchers were seeing. It was a nice, tidy story. But as scientists dug even deeper into the data, they kept finding these strange anomalies that just didn't fit the standard 2% model. They were finding sequences in our DNA that didn't match Neanderthals, definitely didn't match Denisovans, and honestly didn't look purely modern either.
So what on earth is hiding in our DNA? To figure out exactly where these strange, completely unaccounted for genetic anomalies were coming from, geneticists had to treat the human genome like an ancient, microscopic crime scene. They had to look at billions of bases of DNA and somehow separate out our normal mutations and common descent from something entirely alien. And to pull this off, they relied on some pretty incredible new developments in genomic analysis.
To map all this out, scientists used what are called ancestral recombination graphs. Think of our DNA like this massive ancient text that's been cut up and pasted back together over thousands and thousands of generations, a process we call recombination. With enough data, powerful computers can build these graphs to estimate the history of almost every single base in our genome. They literally calculate how many generations back a specific base first appeared and when it was shuffled around. Across the genome's 3 billion bases, this actually gives us a surprisingly accurate historical picture.
So using these graphs, a research team out of Berkeley was specifically hunting for evidence of introgression. Now, introgression is really just the fancy scientific term for when an outside, completely separate lineage contributes DNA to modern humans through interbreeding. Basically, they wanted to know for sure if a totally separate group of ancient hominins had somehow slipped their genetic information into our family tree.
To find this introgressed DNA, the Berkeley team built a brilliant forensic software tool called Trace. And Trace looks for a very specific two-step criteria. First, the bases themselves have to look evolutionarily old, meaning their common ancestry traces way, way back, totally separate from our modern mutations. But the second step, actually, is the really clever part. Their recombination history has to look young. Why? Well, normally, old sequences get shuffled a ton over time. But if they were reintroduced to the modern human genome much later in our history by some outside lineage, they wouldn't have had nearly as much time to undergo all that shuffling. So they'd look ancient, yet surprisingly intact.
Of course, before hunting for the total unknown, they had to prove Trace actually worked, right? So they tested it out on the Neanderthal and Denisovan sequences we already know exist in the human genome. And the results were awesome. Trace hit an accuracy of over 90%, with a shockingly low false discovery rate of less than 0.25%. It even correctly identified that African populations, who only got archaic DNA from Eurasia migrations way later, had just 0.1% of these known sequences. The tool was incredibly precise. It was totally ready to hunt for ghosts.
So, when the researchers finally unleashed Trace on about 500 modern human genomes, it successfully pulled out the known archaic segments just as expected. But it also revealed something absolutely astonishing. Between 0.5 and 1.1% of current human genomes comes from a completely unknown ghost lineage. We're talking about a species of ancient humans we have never found a fossil for, we've never sequenced directly, and yet they live on right inside of us.
Now, I know what you're thinking. 1% sounds tiny on an individual level. You might be like, okay, what's the big deal? But collectively, across modern human populations today, this ghost DNA accounts for nearly 1.5 billion bases. Just to put that into perspective for a second, a single full human genome is about 3 billion bases. That means, as a species, we are carrying around a massive library of genetic material from a completely unidentified ancient relative.
And what's even more fascinating is figuring out when and where this happened. This ghost lineage DNA is present in all modern human populations today, all of them. That tells us definitively that this mysterious interbreeding had to have occurred before our ancestors expanded out of Africa. In fact, modern African populations carry more diverse segments of this ghost DNA, which makes perfect sense because a whole lot of genetic diversity was lost when only a small fraction of the human population bottlenecked and expanded into Eurasia.
But this builds into an even deeper biological mystery. See, our modern genome has these areas known as deserts that completely lack Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. Scientists figure there was something actively problematic or just totally incompatible with Neanderthal DNA in these regions, so evolution just naturally weeded it out. But here is the crazy part. Those exact same deserts actually accepted the ghost lineage DNA. For some wild reason, our ancestors' biology tolerated this mysterious ghost DNA perfectly fine in the exact same regions where it completely rejected our closer Neanderthal cousins. No way, right?
But hold on a second, because the forensic investigation didn't just stop there. As geneticists were analyzing Denisovan genomes, they stumbled onto a second, even older genetic anomaly. Yeah, it turns out that humans aren't the only ones who mingle. The Denisovans had their own ancient encounters, leading to what scientists are calling the super archaic surprise.
When we actually map this hidden history out, the scale is just jaw-dropping. Trace and other analytical tools estimate that the ghost lineage we encountered in Africa branched off from our ancestors about 800,000 years ago, which is roughly the same time the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans split from us. But this new super archaic lineage, it split from our ancestors a staggering 1.8 million years ago. We are talking about a deeply ancient hominin, possibly Homo erectus, still leaving a genetic footprint.
Because Denisovans interbred with this super archaic lineage, they picked up some of that 1.8 million-year-old DNA. And because some modern human populations, primarily in Southeast Asia and Oceania, interbred with Denisovans, well, they inherited it too. Just think about that cascade for a moment. Today, about 0.3% of the Denisovan DNA found in the genomes of modern people from Oceania can be traced all the way back, through Denisovans, to this incredibly ancient 1.8 million-year-old super archaic ancestor.
So you might be wondering, what's the so what here? Why does any of this matter for you today, walking around with these ghost genes? Well, while we definitely don't completely understand the full adaptive impact yet, we do know a few things. These ancient ghost sequences are actually less common in the immediate neighborhood of our active genes. However, when they are found near genes, they're often linked to our modern metabolism and our immune systems. It's entirely possible that interacting with these unknown hominins in ancient Africa literally gave our ancestors the vital biological tools they needed to survive diseases or process nutrients, tools that are literally still operating inside you right now.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're left looking at a genome that looks a lot less like a tidy little family tree and a lot more like this ancient tangled web of cross-species survival. And honestly, it leaves us with a final, absolutely thrilling question. With 3 billion bases in the human genome and analytical tools like Trace really only just beginning to scratch the surface, what other ancient ghosts are still waiting to be discovered inside of us? Thanks for exploring this fascinating genetic mystery with me. Keep wondering, keep looking closely, because sometimes the greatest historical secrets are hidden right inside our own DNA.